Cassidy, and I'm happy to be here today. I was sitting there like you were a couple years ago with my husband, and we were dreading the day that we had to come to this thing, you know. I thought, what a bummer to have to sit here and listen to all this stuff. But, you know, we left with a good feeling about things, and one of the biggest things that made a difference for us was actually when a family member told her story. And when they asked me to do this, I was really happy to be able to do it, because I want people to be inspired the way I was the day that I was sitting right there like you are. And just to give you a little background, I've been married to my husband Jim for 16 years, and 3 years into our marriage, Jim started getting some hand weakness. And I'm a PT, I'm a physical therapist, and I thought, all right, well, you pinched a nerve in your neck, or, you know, what did you do working out? Because he was a very physical guy, and didn't think it was anything too major. But, you know, with the connections that I had to some of my doctor friends, they said, well, why don't you bring him on in for an EMG and an MRI and all this stuff. And we found out that it was something definitely neurological going on, and ironically, he didn't get a diagnosis for 5 years. So it was a really long time. Jim progressed very slowly, and you know, the hand weakness kind of spread up the one arm. Of course, it was his dominant arm that started first, you know, how convenient. And then the other one started, and he had all the twitches. And at the point of his diagnosis, he had pretty significant arm weakness and some slurred speech. His legs really stuck it out a long time. I mean, his legs were really good. Even when he was diagnosed, and his breathing was pretty good too. I mean, we went hiking in Vail. He couldn't button his pants, but he hiked up, you know, 1,000 vertical feet and was less short of breath than I was, so that was a good deal. So, you know, in the meantime, we had 2 kids, even though we knew that there was something looming around as far as a neurological disease, but both of us wanted children, and we didn't know what the future would hold. So, you know, we decided to have kids, and in 2003, he got the diagnosis and stopped working. Jim was never really defined by his profession. You know, it was a job for him. He worked as a biologist in a microbiology lab for a food company, but he was very into his physical abilities all through our early relationship. You know, we went kayaking and hiking and biking and things like that. So, you know, it was a big lifestyle change as the disease progressed. So he stopped work in 2003 and was a stay-at-home dad. You know, we had 2 young boys, and he enjoyed being home with his sons and everything. And Jim and I had a chance to talk about the ventilator, and we always knew that we would choose a ventilator because we have young kids, and he really wants to see his kids grow up, and that's his biggest goal. So I was all for it, and you know, like I said, he progressed very slowly. He went on a BiPAP a couple years ago that he used mainly at night, and then in December we noticed he was really needing to use it during the day. And finally in February, he woke up, well, I woke up, saw him panting on his BiPAP. I called Mary Kelly, and she said, well, you know, I think this is the time. So I had to wake him up and give him the bad news that we were going to the hospital again with trach. And so our experience was that it was, you know, it wasn't like a panic emergency in an ambulance kind of thing. So that's I always wanted to know, well, how, you know, what happens when you suddenly have to go on the ventilator? Well, that's what happened for us. So, you know, we had time to plan and get the kids taken care of and drive at a nice speed to the hospital. Okay, so that was good. So, you know, the next day he got trached, and he was in the hospital for 2 weeks. And because of my background, I mean, I've worked with spinal cord patients that needed a ventilator, and I've suctioned them, and you know, the ventilator didn't really scare me so much, and I was determined to bring him home directly from the hospital, which I think was unusual. But we got everything in place, and within 2 weeks of his placement of the trach, we brought him home. In the meantime, in some of my visits back home, the respiratory company came, and I said the ventilator gods threw up all over my house because there was concentrators and oxygen tanks and 8 million things, for ventilator care all over my house. So I was like, oh my gosh, we have to get this organized. And in the time that he was in the hospital, I put out my feelers. I put out an email to the local nursing school and said that we needed some nurses and tried to get some leads. And I happened to have some friends who were nurses and gave a call, so I knew I had a few people that I could rely on when we got home. We got hooked up with a nursing agency, and Sue told me, you definitely need to have somebody come. You can't do this by yourself. And, she said, you at least need to sleep. And so she said, start with 8 hours of nursing care at night. My husband's a veteran, so we had veterans benefits. They're going to pay for 8 hours of care. Use my 8 hours to sleep because I like my sleep. So unfortunately, I only get 15 minutes. So anyway, we used the company for the 8 hours, and then I tried to supplement throughout the day. And a lot of out-of-pocket expenses my first month because I wanted to make sure I had support, but my support was not cheap because I didn't have kind of my non-skilled people trained the way I do now. And so 2 hours of agency nurses, they were going to send me 8 hours. Okay, well, 11 to 7. If it takes 2 hours to kind of help them to get ready for bed, and I'm the second pair of hands, I'm not getting any sleep. So I said, can you come at 9 and I'll pay the 2 hours? Got very expensive at $50 an hour, 2 hours a day for a month. So that was really kind of crazy. So after a month of getting things organized, took that away. And hired some nursing students, trained them, and was able to pay a much more reasonable rate out of pocket, so that instead of $50 an hour, more reasonable, anywhere between $12.50 and $15 an hour. So that definitely cut my costs. And let's see. So, right now I have much more help than I had when I first came home, and I'm spending less money. I had a lot of feelings of guilt. I still have guilt, and I have people taking care of them, but I'm still in the house. And when I was working full time, I'd send my help home when I got home, and I was still taking care of him, being in a wheelchair. He was in a wheelchair. The only thing different is that he didn't have a ventilator. So it's kind of hard for me to give up my role as a caregiver to other people. Even a month into it, I was still being the second pair of hands for these nurses that probably could have managed on their own. So I think as a caregiver, one thing I learned is that you kind of have to kind of give them over to a helper, even though you're used to being their one and only, and you have to learn how to trust people. But you need to train your staff very well so that you feel comfortable doing that. And it took me till Easter, till I had one of my nursing students stay home and be responsible solely for him while I went to church. And now I'm able to leave the house and not worry because I've trained them on how to manage emergencies and things like that. So I feel much better about it. We have a generator, so that was a good thing. We did that far ahead because the BiPAP didn't really run off of a battery. So we live in the woods. Everybody makes fun of us. We live in the boonies, lose our power frequently, and generator was a really, really good purchase. Let's see. So whenever the feeling of guilt, my kids have always been extremely resilient, and I always try and present things to them in a very stress-free way, very matter of fact. We try and keep things fun. It was a big change for the kids with the ventilator because we were away for 2 weeks, and then when we came home, we had 8 million people in the house, and we had all kinds of equipment, and Dad couldn't eat anymore, and they couldn't hear his voice. Now, granted, his speech was very slurred, so I can understand it better with mouthing the words and no voice than I could with him making a sound. But as a mom, I needed to rely on the guidance counselor and kind of let them know what was going on, and pull each child aside and really have that one-on-one communication with the kids and just say, how are you doing? Are you okay? It's okay to be upset, things like that. So my kids feel much better about the situation. I would say a good month was rough, but in the scheme of things, a month isn't that long of a time, you know. And one of the things that I feel very strongly about is maintaining a sense of humor, you know, throughout everything. And so that's why I put this little collage of pictures on, and I did get my husband's approval that I would like send these out, but you know, we have a good time. We took him to the beach, and my son's making a handicap parking sign on the beach in front of him, you know, and my son dressed up as Slash from Guns N' Roses, and of course we had to put it on Dad, and you know, under his protest, we didn't care, and we put it on him and took pictures. And my son was Ace Ventura one year, and we threw the wig on him, and he looked like Lyle Lovett. I was like, I never saw you looking like Lyle Lovett before, but you totally look like Lyle Lovett. But you know, you can see down the bottom, this is him on a vent. You know, he got to my son's karate promotion. He's a black belt, and we got a new kitten that keeps his lap warm, and he gets out in the van. We go to the park, and you know, we're still able to live. And I asked him, you know, are you happy? And he's happy, and I'm happy too. And for us, we made the right decision. So, you know, over the course of time, things have definitely gotten easier, you know, but it was a little bit of a rough road, but we always managed to stay positive and have a sense of humor, and we're doing okay.
My name is Lindsay Greco, and I very much appreciate the opportunity for the ALS Association to provide conferences like this. It's that opportunity for us to come together and share. And as I've gotten to know the other members of the panel, I realize that we each have a little different story to share. And I think everyone benefits from recognizing there is no one way, and that we each have our own perspectives, and most certainly our own successes and even our own failures. So I really appreciate that. I'm sorry I keep banging this. I better just set it down here. There we go. Okay. I've been married 27 years, which feels like a lifetime, in that my husband and I have worked together and been married. So he's always said to me that he thought he should get double time because we were always together. My husband Dominic and I have two wonderful adult sons and two beautiful grandchildren. So we've been at this for a long time. We planned like every other committed couple to retirement, and enjoying time with our family in that retirement and watching our grandchildren grow. In January '09, Dominic was diagnosed with a very progressive form of ALS, and at that time was given 2 years to live, which in retrospect, 2 years sounded like enough time to kind of gather our thoughts and make decisions about what we needed to do next. Unfortunately, it all seemed to happen so quickly that we, in contrast to Lisa's story, we didn't have time to catch our breath. We found that with each piece of equipment we tried, or each adaptive piece of technology, he very quickly was not able to use it any longer. So we were always playing catch up. I felt more reactive than proactive during that period of time. In August of 2010, the last of many kind of choking spells and inability to breathe, he looked over at my son and I, and he said, "I've had enough." And so, unlike Lisa's story and hopefully others, our situation was very emergent. We thought we had many months, if not longer, to make decisions about undergoing a tracheotomy or having to consider a ventilator. Unfortunately, that day was the last day I heard my husband's voice. And so in hindsight, I think having had certain discussions would have been to our great benefit. He was, of course, rushed to the hospital and heavily sedated, intubated, and of course, I was forced, because I wasn't able to sit and talk with my husband about our choices and decisions and what should come next, I was really on my own to make some very serious decisions on behalf of my husband. We of course had a power of attorney, which gave me the right, and my husband was trusting me to make these decisions, but I would have much preferred we had lengthy discussions in advance, and I would tell each and every one of you, have those discussions. It's important to do so long in advance. The idea of having my husband vented, although I had a concept of that, it was very kind of new information for me. And within 3 days of having been rushed to the emergency room, my husband was trached and vented. And I know we made the right decision, but during that process, I found my brain trying to catch up with how quickly everything was happening. It just happened so fast. Unfortunately, he remained very ill in the ICU for the following 2 weeks with pneumonia and very high fevers. And at that time, it was clear to me, as much as we always discussed that it would never be a long-term decision for Dominic to live elsewhere, to live away from home, I knew he was too sick to come home at that time. And after two very long weeks in the ICU, he had reached a level of stability, but not stable enough to come home. He was still, very heavily sedated and a very sick man. So with the support of Susan Schwartz, who I love dearly, and I felt that became my best friend during that time, and a number of other resources, I evaluated what our options were. What do we do next, knowing I can't bring my husband home? We considered a long-term care facility, not as a long-term solution, but certainly as an interim to stabilize him. And at that 2-week mark, he was transferred to a close-by long-term care facility. He remained very ill, and pneumonia and high temperatures remained. And I very quickly learned through my awareness and getting to know the staff at the long-term care facility that the care being provided to him was inadequate, and I found that it was not a good fit for us. He remained very sick, and I felt that the staff did not get to know him as I had hoped they would. And so I made the decision at some point 2 months after he became a resident there that I needed to bring him home. Sick or not, I felt that he certainly could not remain at the facility. So I set a target date for the middle of December, and I kicked into overdrive. I learned everything I could about the ventilator. I performed most of his therapies there at the facility. And learned anything and everything I could. I just became a sponge to providing my husband's care. I hired a medical group that specialized in ventilator care and could offer home services. Secured a relationship with a long-term nursing nursing agency that of course offered home visits. And through that process, somehow it all came together, and the 13th of December of this last year, my husband returned home, as sick as he was. Within 3 days, my husband's vitals normalized, his temperature became normal, his pneumonia disappeared, and in 10 months now we're clocking, he has been aside from the fact he has ALS, he is completely healthy and has remained healthy ever since. It's been remarkable. Through the process though, there have been many a challenge, and I think I've learned some things through this experience. I created a little booklet, for lack of a better way, to provide you all with some information and have some kind of tips or considerations, things that that certainly, if I had known in advance, might have made my life a little easier. I asked my husband before coming today what his number one issue or concern was, having gone through this process and kind of reflecting back. And he says that his number one issue is communication. That albeit he is unable to move any part of his body from the neck down, his lack of mobility does not bother him half as much as the fact that he is not able to communicate. So the very first issue for us, and I know will be for you as well, is communication, as Alicia was sharing with us, and however that works for you, it must be at the very top of your list. Feeling helpless, I think, has been an issue that he has shared, that without that communication, without that ability to share and tell others what he wants, it is certainly at the very head of his list. He has a very sophisticated communication device, and is a very techie guy to start with, and so that has been his lifeline, most certainly. A couple of other kind of takeaways with regard to the kind of planning to live at home with a ventilator-dependent patient or a loved one is certainly, as was shared by Susan earlier, that I call it the operations manager, for lack of a better term, and that individual who organizes and kind of keeps an eye on when the doctor's visits are going to be, when medication is running low, when medical supplies need to be reordered. That individual who is able to kind of orchestrate. They don't necessarily need to be that primary caregiver, but need to manage everything that's happening, because there are so many things that are happening on the home front with your loved one. Getting involved, getting trained, not being afraid of the ventilator. It is a box that is able to do some pretty amazing things, but it is a piece of machinery. Once you understand the basics of the data that comes from that box, it is not complicated. And recognizing that if you know at least enough, then you're able to kind of orchestrate and provide oversight as to the ongoing care of that individual who so desperately needs the assistance. I think as a higher level note, nursing support has probably been my biggest challenge, and that is, as was shared by a couple of you earlier, things happen, life happens, nurses don't show up. Weather conditions prevent nurses from arriving on time. If there isn't someone there who understands and knows what the needs are, the care will be compromised. And so don't think that someone else is going to do something for you. You really need to take charge and make certain that that you're there, that you can be that individual. And I think that I took a quote from what Dominic said to me shortly after he became vented that I thought was kind of an interesting perspective coming from the individual who's undergone the ventilation or become vent dependent. And he said one of the difficult things that he experienced was giving up control of an unconscious bodily process that he had taken for granted all his life and was now in his conscious thought and has required a tremendous adjustment. Something that we take for granted, like breathing, and now have to give that up to a machine. He went through many weeks of anxiety, but once he overcame that, once he gave up that feeling that he could no longer control this or even attempt to control it, it gave him that sense of peace. But it took that battle to really reach that point that he could no longer do this on his own. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Joanne, and I'm here today to share the story of my husband Jim and our family. I guess to start, I will let you all know I've known my husband Jim for 20 years now. I met him when I was 15. We've been married for 13 years, so it's been a long road. Back in 2007, I would say about June, Jim started to notice that he was having a little bit of weakness in his left hand. And our family joke is anybody who knows Jim knows that he was very frugal and he loved money. He didn't have a lot of it, but he loved it. And he collected coins. So all over our house were coffee cans full of coins. So one day, Jim was, I don't know what he did with these coins, but he was moving them. And he had a coffee can of coins in his hand, and he dropped it. And that was the point where I said, wow, something's wrong. You would not drop any money. And you know, we noticed a few things. He would have some twitches, like when he was mowing the grass, and little things like that we noticed. So he started to go get some medical attention. Before that, I would say Jim was probably to the doctors twice in the whole time that I've known him. So he went and began to get tested, and it only took a couple of months. It was August when he was diagnosed with ALS. At that time, Jim was 35 years old, and we were in the middle of an adoption process. We had previously, probably about maybe 6 years before that, we had lost 2 infants, and we had decided to adopt. So now we find out that Jim has this illness, and we didn't quite know what to do, but we thought, okay, you know, we're going to take this step by step and see what happens. So in August, we had decided that we were going to take advantage, do the best that we could. We decided that we were going to go on a vacation. That was the first thing we were going to do. So we started planning. We had went to Las Vegas for our honeymoon, and it was going to be our 10th anniversary soon. So we thought, well, let's go back to Las Vegas. You know, we'll have a good time there and enjoy ourselves, and you know, be able to do what he wanted to do. Of course, I wanted to go somewhere else, but Jim didn't want to leave the country. Haha on him, however, because December of that year, we had gotten a call that our adoption was finally going to go through. And of course, that was a struggle for us because, you know, we knew that Jim wasn't going to be able to do a lot of the things that, you know, he had wanted to do as a father. There was going to be, you know, a lot of issues, and we knew there was a lot coming down the road. But we decided to go ahead with it anyway. We were in the middle of an international adoption from Guatemala. And at that time, there was a lot of controversy, and they were actually stopping adoptions from the country. So we knew that if we didn't bring him home to us, that he would live in an orphanage. You know, and knowing that it wasn't going to be a very easy life, you know, for him, we definitely knew we could do better than an orphanage for him. So that February, Jim began having trouble walking, and my sister said, I'm coming with you. You don't have a choice. I'm getting an airplane ticket, and you can't say no. So the 3 of us, Jim, myself, and my sister, we traveled to Guatemala, and we brought our son Matthew home. It was a challenging couple of months. Matthew was learning to walk. Jim was learning how to deal with not walking. A few times he almost fell on him, which was a little scary, but that was the way that I convinced Jim he needed to start using a walker, because it's not a good thing to fall on your son. But so Jim began to be a little more accepting of that. In the spring of that year, he decided that he was going to go ahead and use a wheelchair. So we got the wheelchair van, and that summer, we pretty much did everything that we could. We went to the beach, we took Matthew to amusement parks, we went to the park. We did pretty much everything that we could, because we knew it wouldn't be very long, because before it would be very difficult, you know, for Jim to do those things. At that point, Jim had some caregivers that the ALS Association provided. You know, they would come into the home for about 2 hours a day, help him get dressed, help him eat, that sort of thing, which was very helpful. Very shortly after that, we knew that we needed more. I had great family support. My sisters would come every weekend and, you know, help me. At that point, Jim needed help bathing and showering and that sort of thing, so they would help me do that. Jim's sister would help. And eventually, we got assistance through our county Office of Aging through a program called Attendant Care, where we were able to hire people to come in and help Jim. At that point, Jim's sister actually quit her job, and she became one of Jim's caregivers. So while I was at work, She would come and take care of Jim during the day. I had a couple of friends that would come and they would take care of Jim during the day as well. And we just, we did the best we could. And we went through, and Jim began to lose his ability to talk. He had gotten a computer called a Dynavox, where he was able to use a head pointer, a little sticker on his glasses, and he loved that thing. That was his favorite thing in the world. That man would spend 12 hours a day playing poker online with it. Excuse me. It got to the point where he was unable to stand anymore, so I would have to fully use a Hoyer lift to get him into bed. And at 11:30 on a Wednesday night, he didn't want to stop playing poker. And I said, well, you can keep playing poker, but then you're going to stay in your chair because I'm going to bed. Some nights he chose to stay in his chair. Of course, I would get up in an hour and get him into bed anyway. But I threatened that I wouldn't. But he loved that thing. He talked up a storm. He emailed, he texted me, the whole 9 yards. We were able to keep the communication going for a long time with that. In about November of 2008, he was definitely having trouble swallowing. He was choking. He decided at that point that he wanted a feeding tube. So we had a feeding tube placed, and he was still eating a little bit. I remember it was right around Thanksgiving, and he was eating a little bit, and then we would supplement with the feeding tube. He loved his coffee, so every time he had medicine, coffee went in the feeding tube. But, we just kept going, and we kept doing everything that we could do. About that time, he started having lots of trouble with pneumonia. He would get pneumonia at least once a month and be in the hospital. Usually his hospital stays were anywhere from like 3 days to a week. So we would notice pretty much every time he came back from the hospital after he had pneumonia, he would lose some skills. And it got to the point where he wasn't able to keep the pneumonia away. He wasn't able to get all that stuff out. So that's when we had a decision about whether or not he was going to think about going on a ventilator. At that point, he didn't need the ventilator for breathing support, but the doctors had recommended that he have a trach placed so that they were able to kind of get all that stuff out that he couldn't do on his own. So Jim made the decision that he wanted the trach. Still didn't decide about the ventilator, but he did decide that he wanted the trach at that point. That was in April. No, I think it was maybe about March of 2009 he had his trach placed. At that point, we knew we were going to have to make a decision, and we knew that we needed to, talk about that, and I wanted to make sure that he made the decision, not me. So Wendy from the ALS Association, I remember, came to our home, and we talked about what our options were. Was a ventilator something that Jim wanted? How would we be able to manage that? At that point, my son, I think, was 3, and I had a full-time job, obviously. So at that point, we decided that really, for our family, it wasn't going to be possible for Jim to be on a ventilator with full support and stay home. I had a lot of family support. They would come and help me as much as they could. At that point, we had about 80 hours of care during the week through the attendant care program. But still, with 80 hours and a full-time job and a 3-year-old son, we had both decided that there was no way that we could continue this at home once he wanted to go on a ventilator. When we had made the discussion back when we brought our son home, are we going to do this? Can we manage this? We had said that we would put him first, and do the best that we could for him. And I think that was a big part of the decision that Jim and I made for him to live in a nursing facility. As a mother, there was no way that I could give Matthew the care that he needed that we had promised him and give Jim the care that he needed to make sure that he was safe as well. So Jim went into the hospital. He had his trach put in. He came home with the trach, and we took care of him. Basically, I had someone at the home while I was at work. I work an hour away from where I live, so pretty much that was 10 hours in itself. And then I think I had someone maybe 2 or 3 overnights a week who would come and take care of Jim so that I could sleep. We did that for maybe about 2 months, and during those 2 months, Jim had made the decision that he definitely did want to be placed on a ventilator when that became necessary. And that's when we started going to look at nursing facilities. We were lucky enough that there's a nursing facility that takes ventilator patients about 10 minutes from where we live. So we were able to go and look at the facility and try to make a decision as to whether or not that's something that would be workable and appropriate for Jim. I would say maybe about a month after we had that discussion, Jim had an appointment at the ALS clinic in Allentown, and we decided that after his appointment we were going to go to the nursing facility and he would stay there. It wasn't an easy decision to decide that he would live in a long-term care facility. Obviously I felt very guilty, but looking back, I think for our family it was the best decision. Jim moved to the facility while he still had the ability to use his Dynavox and talk like crazy, so he got to know everybody there, and they got to know him, so they know how to joke with him, and they know that they can say things that make him laugh, and they know how to make him laugh. They know what TV shows he likes to watch, all of those sorts of things, because they knew him when he was still able to communicate very well with them. My son and I, we live about 10 minutes away, so we're able to go every day, most days. Obviously, if I'm sick, we can't go. If he's sick, we can't go, that sort of thing. But we're able to go. His family members go visit him. And the facility, I won't say it's perfect. I had to do a lot of education with the people that work at the facility to kind of make them understand that Jim can make his own decisions. They would call me and ask me if Jim wanted this or Jim wanted that, and I would say, did you ask him? Unfortunately, at this point now, it's a lot more difficult because Jim lost the ability to move his head, so he's not able to use the Dynavox anymore. We tried an eye gaze system for him, which was really unreliable and frustrating for him as well. At this point, he basically is doing yes-no with eye movement. He has the ability to kind of move his eyes left and right at this point. So I'm very thankful that we did make the switch to the long-term care facility when we did, because a lot of the people there know him. They're able to communicate with him with his yes-no system. They know his likes, they know his dislikes. They know what makes him comfortable. They know that he likes his room to be 60 degrees, which his neighbor doesn't like, but that's what they make blankets for. They know that whenever poker's on TV, they better let him watch it because that's what he wants to do. He has the ability to leave the facility. I've been trained on how to take care of the ventilator. So, every couple months we're able to, take him out to the park or take him to the casino, which he loves, and things like that. We have my son's birthday parties at their pavilion, which is right out back. So they send him out with a nurse or a nursing assistant, and he's able to come to the parties. So again, for us, it was the right decision. I would say that the biggest piece that I think is important to share is to talk about those things ahead of time. I'm certainly thankful that I didn't have to make that decision for Jim, that he was able to make that decision, and that it didn't occur in an emergency situation, and just keep talking about it. Even to this day, Jim and I still talk about, how do you want things to go? What are your desires? And basically his desire is that as long as he can still experience his son growing up in some way, that he wants to stay where he is. So I think that's all.
First of all, I would like to thank Susan Swartz and Julie McKeever for giving me an opportunity to speak to you all on behalf of myself my son who is on a vent, Jermaine, my husband Donald, and my eldest granddaughter Tatiana Jacqueline Angel Greer. And I am reading from a script because, and I'm glad I wrote it, we all have such stories, and there are things that run true in all of your stories that run true in mine, but they're all very different. I really have been grappling with how to language myself so that I don't offend, but I can't speak on how I do or did anything or will do anything without infiltrating it with how God was and is by my side every step of the way. He was with me, and he sent me what I needed when I didn't even know what I needed. He was the thing that kept me from going insane, and it was him who kept my heart from being crushed. He's been with me and my family as we tripped through and limped through this journey. And we really, I can't say we knew what we were getting into, but we just went through it. And it's my prayer that you will learn from my mistakes and that you would go in, if you decide to do it, as prepared as possible. You need to prepare your heart, your mind, your body, your home. You need to make sure finances are in place, contacts, assistance, caregivers, family. And if you do decide to do this, it will require that you gather necessary materials. It will require that you let go of things that you no longer need or are a part of who you are or were, to make room for what you're about to undertake and who you will become. And my husband wrote this: this is a transformational event. At the end, you will not be the same person you are now. While you're preparing, I recommend you take time to be still. While you're preparing, while you're making this decision, breathe. Ask yourself, where is your breath? Ask. Somebody else said you have to ask questions. What steps should you take? Breathe. Listen. Sometimes you just have to stop and just be quiet. And then talk to someone, read or listen to something that's inspiring. Breathe again. Learn to ask questions. Ask again and again until you understand. I am not in the medical field. I sat, I watched, I asked questions. People thought I was crazy. I kept asking them until I understood. I worked in administration area of corporate America, but I needed to be fed more, so I worked in administration for a private program which assisted minority youth who were being prepared to go to college. Another private company who assisted students from the Great Lakes area on how to prepare and conduct themselves while living and going to school in an urban environment. And I worked in a hospital where they were doing research for cancer on rats. I also worked for 11 years in my home church.